Assalamu alaikum, fam. Hope you're doing fantastic. So let's continue our reading of the Federalist Papers. Highly educational. Now, we are in number 26 topic, though, right? We're in essay 27 of Alexander Hamilton, but the same subject is going to be continued, which was the idea of restraining the legislative authority in regard to the common defense considered. And, you know, Hamilton always has the best essay titles, man. It's just brilliant. It has been urged in different shapes that a constitution of the kind proposed by the convention cannot operate without the aid of a military force to execute its laws. So, the constitution can't be enforced without a military to execute its laws in a way, right? Like how he's putting it. This, however, like most other things that have been alleged on that side, rests on mere general assertion, unsupported by any precise or intelligible designation of the reasons upon which it is founded. As far as I have been able to divine the latent meaning of the objectors, so notice how he says that, to divine the latent meaning of the objectors, right? Answering the naysayers, and to divine, like to really, to divinate upon their naysaying. I mean, he has such a great way of like talking to his detractors, right? It's quite brilliant. It seems to originate in a presupposition that the people will be disinclined to the exercise of federal authority in any matter of an internal nature. So here it's like he's telling them this suspicion you have originates from you assuming that every person will complain about the federal authority dealing its force out upon anyone domestically, right? So it really kind of shows you how he's getting to his objectors. That not everyone is going to be as paranoid of the federal authority, right? Because remember, we're dealing a lot with states' rights versus federal rights. Or duties, rather. Waiving any exception that might be taken to the inaccuracy of inexplicitness of the distinction between internal and external. Inaccuracy of inexplicitness of the distinction between internal and external. So, the inaccuracy in the very explicit nature of an internal affair, of an external affair. Let us inquire what ground there is to presuppose that disinclination in the people. So disinclination means that they're not going to be inclined towards the federal authority getting in to an internal nature to such a degree that they won't be able to exercise very much or really dislike the way in which the military will execute the laws of the federal upon the state. You see? Very interesting the way he's worded it. Unless we presume at the same time that the powers of the general government will be worse administered than those of the state governments. I mean, you know, that's the classic American argument. The federal government's a bunch of idiots. You'll hear that a lot, right? In southern states, in basically red states. And then in the blue states, you'll see worshiping of the bigger government, whether they say it or not, right? Especially them. You know, trying to bring in today soft forms of communism and socialism and having the federal government have the ability to shut down your business, right? So the states being able to determine their future versus the federal government imposing themselves upon the states, you know, against their will. So let's see what he says, you know. I mean, it does presume, but the people at this time, the 17th century, were weary of federal power because they just got rid of the King George III. Get out of here, bloody redcoats. We'll kick them back, right? They don't want to be the types to bend the knee to a crown. George Washington is, and them, they're not the crown, but they're very weary of getting another oppressive system that doesn't just let them have their liberty, their self-determination, right? So Hamilton is raising good points here. There seems to be no room for the presumption of ill will, disaffection, or opposition in the people. I believe it may be laid down as a general rule that their confidence and obedience to a government will commonly be proportioned to the goodness or badness of its administration. That's a fair point. So he's contending their loyalty, happiness, how disaffected they'll be, how oppositional they'll be, will be dependent on how is the federal government doing. If your federal government is doing a good job, you'll be more inclined to maybe allow them to exercise some sort of authority you may not always do. But today you could see a shining example of how upset the states are with how oppressive the potato administration is doing, forcing and mandating certain things that people don't want, right? It's amazing. So he has a good point. It must be admitted that there are exceptions to this rule, but these exceptions depend so entirely on accidental causes that they cannot be considered as having any relation to the intrinsic merits or demerits of a constitution. So demerits and merits. So really emphasizing that it's not just about the constitution, but the goodness or badness of the administration. You see? These can only be judged of by general principles and maxims. So principles and maxims. Various reasons have been suggested in the course of these papers to induce a probability that the general government will be better administered than the particular governments. So, you see that? Now he's saying, like, particular governments means the states, right? So to induce a probability, like, it's going to be more likely that the federal level will be more, better functioning in their administration and such than the states. I don't know. The principle of which are that the extension of the spheres of election will present a greater option or latitude of choice to the people, that through the medium of the state legislators, who are a select bodies of men and who are to appoint the members of the National Senate, there is a reason to expect that this branch will generally be composed with peculiar care and judgment. Look how fancy he is, right? That their members will be appointed with peculiar care. Look how kind he is to the American people. Look how they get appointed these days. Oh, who's my mayor? Who's my state senator? Don't nobody care. People are on TikTok. Americans have given up that duty of really being careful who they send to represent them. And that's why we have so much problems now. Especially Gavin Newsom, AOC, all of them. Just a swamp mess of corruption, celebrityism, attention seeking, very few Ron Pauls and Tulsi Gabbards, right? It's all about getting it in, and Nancy Pelosi is a dinosaur, right? People don't even pay attention to try to vote her out, even though she's so horrible. So no one's taken the peculiar care to boot out corruption, and it's spread so badly that you almost think it can't be repaired, right? But look how nice he talks about the American people, how he hopes that they will do this. That these circumstances promise greater knowledge and more comprehensive information in the national councils. You see that? Greater knowledge, more comprehensive information. If the people who are selected to the Senate are chosen with peculiar care. Hey, so we hope. It ain't so, my friends. And that on account of the extent of the country from which those to whose direction they will be committed will be drawn, they will be less apt to be tainted by the spirit of faction and more out of the reach of those occasional ill humors or temporary prejudices and propensities which in smaller societies frequently contaminate the public deliberations. Now look at that. Beautiful said. Oh my gosh. MashaAllah. Look at that. Okay, so he's saying If people are bringing forth comprehensive information, greater knowledge, they're more selective on how they choose people in the National Senate, that they will not be tainted by the spirit of faction. I want you to think about that. Today's politics, infected with both sides with factions. Horrifically, Cori Bush, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, these people, even Nancy Pelosi's wing, are so factional, meaning they're not trying to unite the country. They're trying to get their specific vicious agenda through by any means. Lying, marrying their own brothers, doing all kinds of weird, bizarre things. Faction causes disunity, right? Disunity. Cori Bush is one of the worst politicians we have. One of the worst. But she got caught sending fake threats to herself. I did some research on when she said, shout their names of people on death row, one of her tweets, and all of them had committed horrific crimes that they should have the death penalty for. She also wants to defund police, but spent over $70,000 for her private security. So she's one of the worst corrupt politicians that we have. And every time she opens her mouth, it's about gender, skin tone, and it's not about healing, pressing forward. It's always about her while she's wearing expensive jewelry. She is the prime example of what Hamilton will describe as somebody who is the embodiment of the spirit of a faction, right? It is quite sad the state of affairs we have, right? Temporary prejudices, occasional ill humors. These are things you want to keep out of the Senate. You want to do what's best for everyone. Now, not mask it as for everyone, right? You're not trying to put men against women, creating all these gender identities, all these different ways to pit Americans against each other to cause more chaos. No. Unification is what they wanted. Knowledge, comprehensive information, to really look at better principles and maxims that are in the Constitution to make the health of the nation strong. Man, you can totally see how far we've strayed. Beget injustice and oppression of a part of the community, and engender schemes which, though they gratify a momentary inclination or desire, terminate in general distress, dissatisfaction, and disgust. So he's saying here, if you have these politicians who embody the spirit of a faction, who submit to ill humors, that will do temporary prejudices and have a propensity to contaminate the public deliberations in favor of what their faction wants instead of what's good for the country and everyone, is going to create a system of injustice and oppression, right? It may give them a gratification of a momentary win, but they divided the nation more while they got their one little tiny win, right? And that it will cause the people to feel disgust, dissatisfaction, and distress. And he couldn't be more right. People are very unhappy with everyone in the office of the Senate and Congress. So, he has a high hope of how we're supposed to be. And when you read the brilliant founding fathers, you begin to see how far America has fallen. And who did it? And how did we get there? And who's doing it now? It's a big reason why they don't want anyone to study these people anymore. Instead, they want you to study Marx or learn Mandarin.